بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم تسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. We have reached the 110th blessed aphorism in this collection compiled by Imam Ibn Ata'illah Sikandari radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where he states, متى جعلك في الظاهر ممتثلا لأمره ورزقك في الباطن استسلاما لقهره فقد أعظم المنة عليك. This can translate, when he makes you obedient to his command outwardly and blesses you with submission to his power inwardly, then he has bestowed his favor upon you greatly. Yet another important aphorism in an individual piece of wisdom that we are in need of. And let us never forget the importance of wisdom and how it is one of the human needs. When we speak about the human needs, we tend to speak about the outward needs. We obviously need food. We obviously need drink. We obviously need sleep. We need to protect ourselves from the elements and wear clothing. We need shelter. These are all needs, of course. Living in a society where there is security, these are all needs, of course, of the human being. But we also have fundamental needs internally that are even more important than those outward needs. And one of them is rahmah. We have a need for mercy. We're not to be that we receive mercy. We can't exist as human beings. We have a need for hope. And one of the needs of the heart, excuse me, one of the needs of the heart is wisdom, such that they say that if the heart goes 3 days without receiving wisdom, just as the physical body can potentially die if you don't feed it for 3 days, likewise the heart, if you do not feed it wisdom, could potentially die. And so we're in need of constantly feeding our heart, just as we feed our outward bodies. And if you think about it, you could eat well for 50 years of your life. And then were you to not eat for 5 days, 3 days, 4 days, you could die. So meaning you have to continue doing it until the very end. So it's not enough just to feed it once or here and there. And really think about it. What would happen to you if you stopped eating outwardly? You'd become emaciated. You'd get sick. You'd be skin and bones. But were we to somehow see what happens to people's hearts internally, this is what you would actually see happening, is that people's hearts are emaciated. They have bad spiritual health because they neglect them. You neglect your physical body, it's just a matter of time. It's going to catch up to you eventually. It might be a little bit more resilient when you're younger, but it will catch up to you, especially when you get close to the 40s. And if it's really bad, even before that. And likewise, the state of our hearts. And one of the most important differences between knowledge and wisdom, because as I believe we have stated before, all wisdom is knowledge, but not all knowledge is wisdom, is that wisdom takes into consideration the aqibat al-amr, the end result of something, the consequences of something. And so you can then imagine now that if you have a world in which there is an abundant amount of knowledge, mostly experimental, and you add to that power and ability and money that you can actually do these things. Look at what's being funded in the universities. And it tends to be that one of the sciences in particular, things that are applied technology or things that people can actually that use or benefit from. The point here is that this is a recipe for disaster. And if you develop something like social media, and you don't take into consideration the consequences nor do you even really care for that matter. And many of these people are actually very demonic, even though they might appear to be that, not so, but the reality is many of these people, a'udhu billah, is that it's as if they receive inspiration from shaitan. Anyhow, that the heart needs wisdom. In order for us to do right things, we need wisdom. And essentially, wisdom can be summarized by having the right conception and doing the right thing while taking into consideration everything that you need to think about. That's the essence of what wisdom is. So this is what this great author does for us. He opens up the door for us to develop a deeper understanding, where it's not just knowledge, rather it is wisdom. It helps us navigate life and to be the way that we need to be so that we are in alignment with the way that Allah Ta'ala wants us to be. And for us, this is of the utmost importance. We want to be aligned with the way that we should be. We want to be oriented with the way that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has commanded us to be. So, when he says here, مَتَى جَعَلَكَ فِي الظَّاهِرِ مُمْتَثِلًا لِأَمْرِ وَرَزَقَكَ فِي الْبَاطِنِ اسْتِسْلَامِ لِقَهْرِهِ فَقَدْ أَعْظَمَ الْمِنَّةَ عَلَيْكَ. When he makes you obedient to his command outwardly and blesses you with submission to his power inwardly, then he has bestowed his favor upon you greatly. So this can be summarized as the great blessing of outward obedience and inward submission. So meta, whenever or when he, ja'alaka, ja'ala here is to make someone do something. Ja'ala. And it also can take on the meaning of creation, khalaqa. But here, ja'alaka, Allah made you a certain way. And here, some authors point to the fact that this relates to our fitrah. When Allah Ta'ala makes us the way that we're supposed to be, that He enables us to actually do that outwardly. Fil dhahir, this is outwardly. Mumtathilan, imtathala simply is to obey. Li amrihi, an amr is a command. Wa razaqaqa, you can translate razaqa in different ways. The primary way is provide, but it could also be bestow upon, and translate here as to bless with. That what is he blessing you with here? Fil batini, inwardly. So again, you always see this in his aphorisms. So he's speaking about the dhahir and he's speaking about the batin, the outward and the inward. And he says, what is he giving you inward here? At istislam. So this is where we have the word Islam. This is where the word Muslim comes from. And the trilateral is salima yaslamu. So istislam is submission, where you just resign your affair over. And that you submit completely to Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. Then we have this word liqahri. So qahar, one of the names of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is Al-Qahhar. He is the domineering, or he is the subduer. And so the word qahara means to overpower, to subdue, or even to conquer or defeat. So when Allah Ta'ala, when we give him the name of his Al-Qahhar, we understand that as he is the one who does whatever he wants and no one can do anything about it. If Allah Ta'ala decrees something to be, there's nothing you can do. You have to just accept it. It's going to happen the way he wants it to happen, whether or not you want it to happen or not, whether you like it or not. Allah does whatever he wants to do. So this is very important. We have a particular response that we're being called to here in relation to the qahr. Here it's just loosely translated as his power, because his power is what enables him to do this. He can overpower anyone. No one can do anything if Allah Ta'ala chooses to decree something. So then, faqad a'zama. A'zama is to make something great. Faqad a'zama al-minnata alayk. He has bestowed his favor upon you greatly. Minna can be translated as blessing, favor. It's also a gift. But فَقَدْ أَعْظَمَ الْمِنَّ عَلَيْكَ. He's made that minna upon you عظيم. He has that bestowed his favor upon you greatly. So we're going to look at tonight a few of the great Imams' commentaries on this blessed aphorism, some of which is similar, and then each one has these beautiful nuances that they bring out. The first is Imam al-Sharnubi. What does he say? This means مَتَّى زَيَّنَ اللَّهُ ظَاهِرَكَ بِالتَّقْوَى. When Allah has adorned the outward aspect of you with taqwa. So here, taqwa is defined as imtithal. So the word here in the aphorism is mumtathilan. But taqwa is defined as imtithal al-awamir, obeying the commands. And so when Allah Ta'ala has zayyana, that He has adorned you, so meaning the true adornment of the human being is taqwa. People usually like to have nice clothing. They usually like to smell good. They usually like to look good. They like to be healthy. They like to wear nice things. And if you make the right intention, there's nothing wrong with all of that. But the true beauty is to outwardly be a person of taqwa. Even if the society in which you live thinks you're strange, even if they look down upon you, even if they make fun of you, even if they say whatever it is that they say about you or think that you're backwards or whatever. True beauty is to be a person of taqwa. To see something that Allah dislikes and to avoid it out of fear of Him and desire for closeness to Him and out of love for Him, because He doesn't want you to do that. So you prefer what He wants over what you want. So true beauty, زَيَّنَ اللَّهُ ظَاهِرَكَ بِالتَّقْوَى, is to be a person of taqwa. And if we think that there's anything that's beautiful that doesn't follow taqwa, so if you see the picture of an actor that's very handsome or that very beautiful, and they're doing something that is haram, to think that that person is beautiful is a huge mistake. There's no way that they can be beautiful, even if they're incredibly physically beautiful or handsome, if their behavior is not in line with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants. The importance of having this perspective for everything that is that we see and everything is that we nastahsan, that we deem to be good. And one of the very important things is to have this perspective. This creates a protection for us. With the lure that's out there in this world that causes so many people to slip up and to fall into things that are haram, that usually relate to the shahawat, the various desires of the human being. Ultimately, a person of taqwa is not affected by that, not deluded by that. They know the end result of what's going to happen if someone does those things. And so they don't even see it as beautiful because they know only taqwa in reality is beautiful. And then he explains what is taqwa: imtithal al-ma'murat wajtinab al-manhiyat. Taqwa is nothing other than to fulfill the commands and avoid the prohibitions. So when Allah Ta'ala has blessed you to be like this outwardly, but your internal state, وَبَاطِنَكَ بِالْإِسْتِسْلَامِ أي الْإِنْقِيَادِ, you're in a state of submission. Inqiyad is literally to be led. It's a beautiful word in the Arabic language. The Arab have the word qada and saqa. Qada is to lead from in front. So that would be like if you're holding on to the reins of the horse, for instance, or that string that's connected to the camel, and you're leading the camel from the front. Qada. Saqa is to drive from the rear. So you would say saqa al-ghanam is that he that drove the goats to the pasture, for instance. There's a difference. So inqada literally is to let yourself be led. So inqada al-jamal, the camel was led, and he let himself be led by the person who was leading him forward. And this is how we need to be. We just let ourselves be led. And again, that's not a very popular commodity in the modern world. Everyone wants to be a leader. Don't be a follower. Be a leader. No. We're followers. And you can't truly be a leader if you're not a follower. وَاجْعَلْ لِي لِلْمُتَّقِينَ إِمَامًا. Bless me to be a leader to all good. Here, so there's a talab here. You're asking, imama, but what you're really asking is not to be in a position of leadership. To be a leader of all good, i.e. you rush to the obedience of Allah, you rush to taqwa, and as a result is that you positively impact other people and inspire them to do the same thing. That's the meaning of leadership. Not that you're in control of other people. And General al-Din doesn't want us to be a leader. You're ready to be a leader if you have to. And if you need to step up, and this is why Dr. Umar has this beautiful way of referring to the Sahaba, is that they were follower leaders. In other words, none of them wanted leadership. They were perfectly content. The Prophet made Sayyidina Osama bin Zayd, hibbu Rasulillah, the beloved of Rasulillah. And he was about 18 years old, and Abu Bakr and Omar were in the army. And if he told them to do something, they'd have to follow. And there was no nafs. And there's no report of them being bothered by that. It was some of the other people that were saying that after the Prophet ﷺ passed away, he said, why, he's too young to lead. And what does Sayyidina Abu Bakr say in relation to that? The first thing that I'm going to do, before that, he said, do you want me to take the emirate of a person that the Prophet ﷺ himself made an emir? He says, the very first thing that I'm going to do is to reaffirm that he is the emir of this army. Rasulullah himself made him the emir. Would the Prophet ﷺ make someone emir who's not worthy or able to do so? Of course not. But imagine that they were much older at that point. They were much older at that point. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr was in his probably early 60s, because he died at 63. Like our Prophet ﷺ, he had the caliphate for 2 years and 6 months, so he was around the age of 60. Sayyidina Umar would have been a little bit younger, but they're in the army of an 18-year-old. But the Sahaba were able to control their nafs. They're human beings, but they were able, raised by who? Who were they taught by? Who refined them? Sayyidina Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And so in Qada, this is how we want to be, is people that are led. And so to be a leader of good is what you want, i.e. that you rush to good, and as a result, you are a means of other people to also do the good. And think about the stories of fatwa being passed around, where someone's asked a question, ask so-and-so, ask so-and-so, ask so-and-so, until it comes back to the original one that people asked. There are many stories like this. And our Prophet ﷺ, they knew that he warned that anyone who seeks leadership, they'll be left to it, i.e. they won't receive divine assistance. And anyone who dislikes leadership, but when it's forced upon them, steps up and fulfills the rights of it, they'll be assisted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So internally, this is what istislam is. It's submission. But here, submission to what? لِقَهْرِهِ, to his power. In other words, when he decrees something to happen, whether it's something that we like or whether it's something that is bitter for us, we're in submission. مَعَ الرِّضَى وَالصَّبْرِ, with the two great traits of contentment and patience. عَلَى الْمُصِيبَاتِ, when we go through afflictions. If this happens, where Allah joins this and unites this in someone, outwardly and inwardly, فَقَدْ أَعْظَمْ أَيْ النِّعْمَ عَلَيْكَ, the blessing that Allah Ta'ala has given you is great. So Imam al-Shanumi then says, فَإِنَّهُ لَا دَرْجَةَ أَعْلَى مِنَ التَّقَلَّبِ فِي الْعُبُودِيَّةِ الظَّاهِرِ الْبَاطِنِ, there is no degree greater than to move about in the servitude of Allah outwardly and inwardly. Where there's taqallub, you're moving about, you're in outward submission and you're inwardly submitting. Outwardly you're obeying, and inwardly that you're turning your affair over to Allah and submitting. So that's a very short, it's one of the shorter commentaries, but look at the meanings. It's packed with meaning. And then one of the other scholars, Sidi Ali Bayumi, that he says, مَتَى جَعَلَكَ فِي الظَّهْرِ مُمْتَثِلًا لِأَمْرِهِ. So when he makes you obedient to his command outwardly, يعني فعلا وتركا, in relation to doing things, in relation to avoiding things. Sometimes it's harder for us to do what it is that we should do, and sometimes it's harder for us to leave what it is that we need to leave. But in both states, that we need to do the right thing in terms of what we have to do and should do, in terms of that what we have to leave or should leave. وَرَزَقَ فِي الْبَاطِنِ الْإِسْتِسْلَامِ, and blesses you with submission to his power inwardly. الْإِنْقِيَادُ الرِّضَاء. Again, he points to here that this word inqiyad is that allowing yourself to be led, yani submission, وَالرِّضَاء, and contentment, لِقَهْرِهِ, to his power, عَطَاءً وَمَنْعًا. Whether you're given something or whether something's taken from you. Whether that you're given something or that you're prevented something. So this internal submission has to be whether we experience withholding or that we're given something. فَقَدْ أَعْظَمَ الْمِنَّ عَلَيْكَ. Then he has bestowed his favor upon you greatly. So he says here, حَيْثْ وَفَّقَقَ لِخِدْمَتِهِ, that he's giving you enabling grace to be in service of him. وَأَرَاحَ ظَاهِرَكَ مِنْ مُخَالَفَتِهِ, and he's granted you repose from going against what he says to do. And so we are the ones who are going to be in a good state if we obey Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala. We're the ones who benefit. Allah does not get harmed by our disobedience. We're the ones that benefit. Following the sacred law is in our own interests. And then, وَسِرَّكْ مِنَ الْإِعْتِرَاضِ, and your internal state is protected from opposing the divine decree. So what does he say this means? When he ends the aphorism by saying, فَقَدْ أَعْظَمَ الْمِنَّةَ عَلَيْكَ, he has bestowed his favor upon you greatly, meaning فَلَا تَلْتَفَتْ لِشَيْءٍ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا بَعْدَهِ, don't turn to anything of the world after it. Meaning if you've given this, you've been given something infinitely greater than anything you could be given outwardly. And think about the most things that most people ask for are worldly things. And those aren't bad. To ask for good health in children and marriage and sustenance and things like this. But his whole point is that these are much greater to ask for. And we ask for those other things as well. But oftentimes what they ask for is restricted to worldly things. Don't turn to anything of this world after this. And then what would happen as a result of doing that, if Allah would give you these things and you turn to things of this world, فَتَسْقُطْ مِنْ عَيْنِ الْحَقِّ, is that you lose your station with Allah. بِطَبَلِ الْخَصِيصِ بَعْدَ التَّلَبُّسِ بِالشَّرِيفِ, because you're seeking something that's lowly after Allah Ta'ala has given you something which is so much greater. Imam Muhammad Mahayat al-Sindi has a brief commentary that on this part where he says, وَرَزَقَكَ فِي الْبَاطِنِ الْإِسْتِسْلَامِ لِقَهْرِهِ, and blesses you with submission to his power inwardly. حَيْثْ لَا تَجِدْ حَرَجًا فِي صَدْرَكَ مِمَّا يَفْعَلُ وَتُسَلِّمْ أَمْرَهُ تَسْلِيمًا بَلْ يَنْشَرِهُ قَلْبُكَ لِذَلِكَ إِكْرَامًا لَهُ وَتَعْظِيمًا. So how does he describe this? What happens to you internally when you submit to his power inwardly? It means that you don't find any resistance in your heart for what it is that you know you need to do. And you completely submit. وَتُسَلِّمْ أَمْرَهُ تَسْلِيمًا. You completely submit such that بَلْ يَنْشَرِهُ صَدْرَكَ. Not only you're just forcing yourself to submit now, your heart actually expands. So that's even a higher state. There's people who are like this, where they experience the qahar of Allah, which is a very jalali thing. But that's hard for us when we're so attached to the dunya, because our perspective is skewed and the attachments of the heart are preventing us from being in a way that is more pleasing to Allah. Of course, you have to at least be patient. And that's a station. That's a good thing. But it's a much higher thing to go beyond patience where there's inshirah. Your heart is still expanded. So normal people, when we get what we want, we're happy. When we are prevented something we want, we're sad. But what is this really the state of? Children. This is how children are. And because most of us are like children in the spiritual path, when we get what we want, we're happy. When something's taken away from us, like the way you take a toy, this is the reality. We're not oftentimes crying outwardly, but we throw tantrums. Children are excused. That's just how they are. Adults, though, ya Allah. But this is the reality of our state. That's why we read these books, because we want to be better. Whereas the people of Allah, it's different. Is that for them, they're such in a state of submission, they've trained themselves. And from the bounty of Allah, Allah has made them only want what He wants. And so for them, there's inshirah. Their hearts are expanded when other people get constricted. And then we have this Sheikh Ali Baras speaks about this as well. And he has some beautiful nuances here about the first part. مَتَى جَعَلَكَ وَاسْتَخْلَصَكَ وَثَبَّتَكَ فِي الظَّاهِرِ. When He makes you and He chooses you and makes you firm in this proper way to be outward. Yani meaning, في الظاهر الأفعال, how you act in the various things that you do. وَسَنِيَاتِ الْأَحْوال, and the lofty states. في الأقوال وسائر الأعمال, everything that you say and do. And then he says, سواء كان من قبيل الأمر أو اجتناب النهي. So whether this relates to an obligation that is wajib or mustahab. So this doesn't apply just to the commands, it also applies to things that Allah Ta'ala has encouraged us to do. So as long as we're still like having difficulty doing supererogatory, we need to work on our hearts. And not just in relation to the haram, because you have to avoid that, but also in relation to the makruh, and to the things that are disliked. وَمُثَابِرًا عَلَيْهِ, and he sees us consistently doing this, whatever it is that we can, from doing the wajibat, doing the mustahabbat, that avoiding the muharramat, and avoiding the makruhat. وَمَجْمُوءَ الْهَمِّ, with a concern to be present with Allah Ta'ala and to do all of that solely for Him. وَفَارِغَ الْقَلْبِ إِلَيْهِ, and that your heart is freed up from any distractions, focusing on Him. مُبَادِرًا إِلَى مَا نَدَبَ إِلَى فِعْلِهِ, that hastening to do what He has commanded us to do. مُتَبَعِدًا مَا نُحِيَتْ عَنِ الْأَقْدَامِ عَلَيْهِ. So إِلَى مَا نُدِبَتْ إِلَى فِعْلِهِ وَمُتَبَعِدًا عَمَّا نُهِيَتْ عَنِ الْأَقْدَامِ, hastening to do what He's commanded us to do, and that distancing ourselves from what He's told us to avoid. حريصا على الاكتساب المحامد, being eagerly concerned to acquire every praiseworthy trait. والمكارم مستصحب السنة فيما تأخذ وتذر, and following the sunnah and what you take and what you leave behind. Allahu Akbar. And then we have Sidi Ahmed ibn Ajiba also says something very beautiful here. He says, إنما كان من أعظم من إنه الشاهد المعرفة التي هي منتهى الهمم. This is one of the greatest blessings of all, to be blessed with this, because it is a testimony that you're a person who knows Allah. And knowing Allah is that muntaha al-himam wa aqsa al-ghayat al-ni'am. This is the greatest of all blessings and the thing that, the end that you're actually seeking. So, imtithal al-amr fi al-zahir yadullu ala kamal al-sharia. Following the command outwardly indicates is that you are that completely following the sacred law. وتحقيق ربدي والاستسلام للقهر فالباطن يدل على كمال الطريقة ونهاية الحقيقة. كمال الطريقة. And then submitting to the power of Allah internally indicates is that you are completely following the tariqah. So we have sharia, tariqah, and haqiqah. Sharia is to follow the sacred law. Tariqah is to travel the path, and haqiqah is to witness spiritual realities. وَنِهَايَةِ الْحَقِيقَةِ, the very end of the haqiqah, وَالْجَمَعْ بَيْنُهُمَا هُوَ غَايَةُ الْكَمَالِ. Joining between these two is the highest degree of completion. And then Imam Ibn Abbad al-Rundi says something very beautiful. He says these two affairs, yani doing what was saying here, obedience to his command outwardly and that submission to his power inwardly. This is a part of us doing what is called iqamatul ubudiyya, establishing our servitude of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he says, فَمَتَّ يَسَّرَهُمَ اللَّهُ تَعَالَى لَكَ وَأَقَامَكَ فِي مُرَاءَةِ أَحْكَامِهِمَا وَوَفَّقَكَ لِذَلِكَ فَقَدْ أَعْلَمَ الْمِنَّةَ عَلَيْكَ فَلِمَاذَا تَتَشَوَّفُ. So when Allah has blessed you with these things, and He has established you in this state where you are putting this into practice, He says, what else are you looking to? Like, what else are you inclining towards? وَمَا الَّذِي تَلْتَمَسْ بَعْدَهُ إِن كُنْتَ عَبْدًا حَقِيقِيًّا. What else are you trying to achieve if indeed that you are a true servant of Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala? Meaning this is the essence of what it means to be an abd, to outwardly obey Him and to inwardly submit to Him. So much good is in that. فَقَدْ أَعْظَمَ الْمِنَّ عَلَيْكَ. He has bestowed His favor upon you greatly when He blesses you with this. And then he mentions this beautiful story of Sidi Abu Hassan al-Shadhi radiallahu anhu. And he says that I took the companionship of a brother of mine for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we went to the Badia, that some far off place. And that we went into solitude in a cave. He says, in hopes that we become from the awliya of Allah. And that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us openings like He gave the great people who came before us openings. He said, so we remained in the state for a period of time, making dhikr, being alone, striving along the spiritual path. And they would say to themselves, he says, we would say to ourselves that maybe this Jummah will receive an opening. Maybe this month will receive an opening. And he says, this was our state for a period of time. And then, without any planning, all of a sudden, a sheikh, an elderly man, comes to the entrance of the cave and sought permission to enter. So we said for him, come on in. So he entered, he that then sent salams. And then we asked him, who are you? And he says, my name is Abdul Malik. And then Imam Hassan Shah says, is that we knew then that he was from the awliya of Allah. So we said to him, Kayf halak? How is your state? Yani, how are you? And then he said, Kayf halak, Kayf halak. He kept saying this. Like, Kayf halak, Kayf halak. Basically, kil munkar alayna. Meaning that like, you know, almost like, why are you asking me that question? Indicating that some way that you're thinking is not right. Kayf halak, Kayf halak. And then he says, ثم قال, Kayf hal, how is the state of the one? So they asked Kayf halak, and he's saying, Kayf hal, how is the state of one? Man yuqulu nafsi fi hadhihi juma akun waliyan, that says to himself, this Jummah that I'm going to be from the wali, that this month that I'm going to be from a wali. He says, what fala wilaya wala falah wala dunya wala akhirah. Is that you're not going to attain wilaya this way, nor are you going to attain success, nor are you going to attain any good in this world or the hereafter. And he says, Ya nafs, O soul, ala ta'budin Allah ta'ala kama amarak. O soul, do you not just worship Allah as He's commanded you? Mukhlisa liwajhi, being sincere for His noble countenance, kama amarak, as He has commanded you. Qala ta'ala, and He says, Allah ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I've only created the jinn kind and humankind that save that they worship me. I've not created the jinn kind of human save that they may worship me. ثُمَّ انصَرَفَ عَنَّا. Then He left. What a blessing to meet people like this. So what is He saying? He's teaching them how to be, Ya nafs, O soul. This is how every one of our souls should be. Do you not worship Allah as He has commanded you, sincerely desiring His noble countenance as He's commanded you? We've only been created to worship. So He says it, then He leaves. And then He says, فَانْتَبَهْنَا لِغَلَطِنَا. We realized the mistake that we're making. وَتَيَقَّضْنَا مِنْ أَيْنْ دَخَلَ عَلَيْنَا. Then we became aware of how that we had a misunderstanding. وَعَلِمْنَا. And then we realized is that أَنَّ اللَّهَ تَعَالَى رَحِمَنَا بِهِ. Allah that showed us mercy through this individual. فَرَجَعْتَ عَلَى نَفْسِي. So I went back to myself, بِاللَّوْمِ وَالتَّوْبِيخ, to taking it to account, rebuking it. وَقُلْتُ لَهَا, and I said to it, Ya nafs, man ant, that, oh soul, who are you? وَمَا عَمَلُكَ, that what are you? What do you do? وَمَا خَطَرُكَ, is that what state are you in? أَنْتَ لَا شَيْء, you are nothing. وَتُبْنَا وَاسْتَغْفَرْنَا اللَّهِ, so we that repented and sought the forgiveness of Allah. And then he says, فَفَتَحَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْنَا بِجُودِهِ وَفَضْلِهِ, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that through His generosity and bounty, granted us an opening. In other words, is that the focus is one of ubudiyah, how you and I can become servants. Even though in the beginning, you have to want wilayah, and wanting to be a wali is a good thing. But there's a difference between wanting to be a wali and between expecting to be a wali based upon what it is that you're doing. There's a difference between wanting to be a wali and then having the motivation of what you do is in order to be a wali. In the beginning of the path, those things might be forgiven. But as we progress and become more spiritually mature, it's about ubudiyah, servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is why that he says, radiallahu anhu, when he makes you obedient to his command outwardly and blesses you with submission to his power inwardly, then he has bestowed his favor upon you greatly. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq, Ya Arhamar Rahimin, and bless us to put this into practice, and may He adorn us with taqwa, Ya Arhamar Rahimin. May He adorn our hearts with the higher degrees of iman, and to bless us as He's blessed the great people who came before us, and that we may be people who are granted and blessed with tahqiq al-ubudiyah, is that we have that actualized our servitude to Him in all of our different states. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.